All right, so the two administrative things that you're tired of hearing me say. One, we use the chat as a sign-in sheet, so if you would put in your name and your affiliation, we'll know you're here. We also use chat to flag when you want to ask a question or jump into the conversation. We also record all of HAB committee meetings, so there is a recording running capturing what we're talking about, and you need to know that, so we're in compliance with Washington. With that, Gary is our DDDFO today. Please open the meeting.
Certainly. And apologize. I've been struggling with congestions for about the past 3 weeks, so I apologize in advance for coughing and hacking through today's meeting. And I'm Gary Younger. I'm the Assistant Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the Hanford site. And I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting of the Budgets and Contracts Committee. We are conducting this meeting under the auspices of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and as such, the HAB's role is to provide policy-level advice and recommendations concerning the following EM site-specific issues, including cleanup activities and environmental restoration, waste and nuclear materials management and disposition, excess facilities, future land use and long-term stewardship, risk management, and communication. So without further ado, unless there's any questions directed toward me, that's all I have, and turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you, and I think I'll turn it to Ruth for the approval of the minutes.
Okay.
Have we gotten any comments back on the two sets? Do you know?
I have not received any. Josh, did you receive any?
I did not receive any.
Okay, so there are actually two sets, one for February and one for March. The February was the longer of the two meetings. The March meeting was largely to authorize sending the draft advice on cleanup priorities to the full board.
Right.
But we keep minutes for all meetings, even if they're only an hour long. It's a thing. Comments on February minutes? Okay. Are you okay with approving these and posting them on the website?
Yes.
All right. February minutes. Or March, excuse me. What month is it?
I think they look good as well. I wanted to compliment our facilitation team, and particularly Josh in this case, for the detailed minutes. I'll pass along a comment that I think was made in the PIC committee meeting earlier this week too. I really like the detailed minutes, but it has its drawbacks. Number one, the resources that you might take to correct to collect them has to be fairly significant. But the other drawback is it takes a while to go through them all in detail. But I think it's a great record of the meetings, and I appreciate it.
So, are we good on the March meeting minutes as well? Okay, I normally wouldn't take silence as agreement, but on meeting minutes, that tends to be our habit.
Yep.
So we'll get those posted. The week after board meetings is particularly busy for Josh, finalizing things and doing more minutes. So he's about to hit his busy week of the month.
Very good.
Okay, agenda. So we've got committee leadership elections. We've got a round robin. We're going to talk about the HAB work plan. If any of you have been to other committee meetings, this is the BCC version of that. Chris is going to lead us through do discussion about the Hanford Lifecycle report. And then we're going to look ahead to the committee, the leadership workshop, and kind of what the rest of the spring and early summer is going to look like. Questions about the agenda? Thank you. You're all signing in. That really helps us. At this point, I'm looking for nominations for chair and vice chair of BCC. This is the point at which you really do have to speak up. Nominations?
Ruth, have you gotten any nominations in to date?
I'm not recalling any. And if they've been sent in, then I owe somebody an apology, but I don't have any in my head.
We do have one for Tom Galliotto as BCC chair.
I'm so glad Josh is here.
I'll second that.
Well, thanks, Josh. Okay. Typically, the way you proceed with these, Ruth, is to collect any nominations that you might have, and for the chair and then the vice chair. Is that the process?
Yeah, what we usually do is collect the nominations and then ask if those individuals are willing to serve. You can't get voluntold; you have to volunteer. And then between now and the break, we ask people to send me an email with their votes, their preferences, and then I announce after break the results of that.
Okay.
So, are there other? Chris, hand up.
I nominate Tom again for chair.
Okay. Are there other nominations for chair?
Yeah, if there are, speak up, folks. Feel free.
So it would appear we have a single nomination. Let's open nominations for vice chair.
And before we do that, Ruth,
Yep.
could I see, Emmett is not with us today. I called and talked to him yesterday. There is an issue that maybe Gary has resolved now. I haven't heard, but there is an issue where for some reason his funding to support HAB has been cut off effective immediately, which I don't understand. And that's why he's not here with us today. But he has said that if no one else is nominated and is interested in taking the position, he would be willing to accept the nomination of vice chair, even if it was temporary until we got a resolution of his exemption requests for term limits. So if there are other nominations for vice chair, please offer them. This is the chance that you'd have for doing that, and we'll go from there.
Hey, Tom, this is Gary. Just wanted to let you know that the issue with funding for Emmett, that's his company's decision, and DOE has can't do anything about within. It's outside of DOE's scope on that one.
Oh. Okay, I'll pass that along to Emmett. He didn't seem to know that yesterday, so I'll make sure he does know that.
And I just found out today, and I haven't yet had a chance to get back to Emmett on that.
Okay. Yeah, it seems strange because normally the funding would be for his full term, which ends at the end of June. And to cut it off early seemed awfully odd to us. Okay.
Are there other nominations for vice chair? So Tom, I will have to rely on you that Emmett is willing to do this.
Yes, please do. We'll have to I'll pass this information that Gary just mentioned to Emmett. He can check with his management. I'm not sure what the justification would be because the funding from DOE presumably is there through June. So it wouldn't be costing his company anything except loss of that time for Emmett himself. But Emmett did agree to accept the nomination tentatively until he accepts the nomination. And if we have to, based on the exemption request being accepted or denied, we may have to fill that position at a later time. But for the time being, between Emmett and I, we felt that it was reasonable to have him move forward.
So we will go on that good faith premise. So let's see. Don't have anybody on the phone, so this will make this a little easier. So the way the process works, I mean, if we were in person, we'd do this on little slips of paper, but we're not. So what I want you to do is send me an email. I typed my email in the chat. This only goes to me. The facilitation team has its own. This is my personal work email, ruth.nicholson@slind.net. Nicholson is spelled like Jack Nicholson. And I want you to tell me 3 things: your name, your seat, and who you are voting for chair and vice chair. Your name, your seat, and who you're voting for chair and vice chair. And the email only comes to me. No one else sees it. That's as close as we get to confidential voting. And then at break, I'll count it up and let you know what happens. Oh my God, we're right on time. Woohoo! Just for official BCC members to vote, correct? And you need to see that. So the next up on the agenda is the round robin. You ready to move there, Tom?
Yes, we're awfully tight on this. I just wanted to make a couple comments in advance of this. Some of the other committees have begun to do this, have a brief round robin in their meetings to bring everybody into the discussion, to give people the opportunity to join the discussion and offer their comments on a particular topic in general. And this particular topic we've identified today was how can VCC improve its relationship with DOE? If you have a comment, I don't know that we have to call in individuals on the call, but if you have any comment, please put yourself in queue and would be appreciative of hearing those comments. Unfortunately, we only have 15 minutes in this, so I'll be quiet from here on in. We have 15 minutes for this topic, so please try to be brief on your responses. But thank you. Anybody interested, please jump into the chat. Don't be shy now.
Hey, Jerry.
Hey, tell me if this doesn't work for the agenda in terms of, but I just finished a workshop, the second of 2 workshops Heart of America Northwest had on the FY24 budget, and a lot of public concern about the lack of disclosure by DOE, and the budget priorities Since the development of the advice, the US DOE published a slightly updated comparison to the congressional appropriation for FY22, the actual appropriation. And we see many of our critical areas that were identified in our advice not being funded, it appears. River corridor cleanup cut 46%. Central Plateau, where we don't know, what the breakout is, major cut. So clearly not accelerating WESF, because we see that breakout down to $3 million, not going likely to meet obligations for removing waste from the central waste complex, which we called critical. Clearly not funding in advance of, this for 2 years out. So if you're negotiating with ecology a response to leaking tanks, you'd expect to see some funding requested to respond to leaking tanks. Clearly not a penny in there. So I think in terms of, improving that relationship, I think there needs to be a dialogue. And at times I think that dialogue needs to include US DOE headquarters about major priorities for the budget and how they're determined. And there have been times, and it is the institutional memory that we're losing, but there were times in the past where we had very good headquarters participation with the Budget and Contracts Committee when I was chair and when Harold Heacock was chair, where headquarters people spoke to us about priorities and discussed them with us. And it was very beneficial. And it sometimes resulted in changes. And certainly led to an understanding of what our advice was about. So that would be something I would put forward, is that I think it's important to, if we're going to improve that relationship, having headquarters staff join discussion about, for example, a response to our advice in a discussion format with the advice in front of us and the actual request for FY23 and proposal for 24 in front of us all. I hope that was on point for the question.
Yeah, actually, it really is, Jerry. Thank you for that comment.
Chris.
I guess mine is similar to Jerry's in that I think we could do a heck of a lot better in terms of advice or conversations with DOE if we could get information at the ABB level, preferably at PBS, better at level 2, and in our dreams at level 3. If we could get that going forward, like for 2023 and 2024. And I think when appropriations do come in, if we could see how those appropriations are distributed among the PBSs, and preferably at level 2 and in our dreams to level 3, I think we could do a heck of a lot better job in giving advice to DOE and just discussions with DOE.
Great point, Chris. Thank you as well.
I'm showing about 5 other HAB members, some on the committee, some not.
Anyone else offer a comment up? We have been through a lot lately, and the BCC has been in and out of a number of discussions and issues. And there is a lot of energy there that we can tap into if we find a way to do that properly.
I've got Liz and Dan. Liz?
Thanks. One simple thought is just being able to meet more. I feel like the more we're talking, even if we're not on the same page, it just keeps the conversation going and relationships a little bit healthier so that we're not just having these big kind of impasses about sharing information about the budget. It just feels like we just have the same conversation every year. And I know things change too. So I mean, maybe the flip side of that is being hopeful that positions change, information becomes more transparent. But it seems like meeting more, and that's I guess will be more of a conversation for looking at the work plan and proposed calendar for next year. For when BCC is able to meet. But I feel like that this committee has a lot of great recommendations and really tracks things well. But sometimes it feels like we're just talking to ourselves instead of having a conversation. And maybe that's more for, I don't know if how many people got to be at the Tank Waste Committee on Wednesday, but there was just a really great, we actually had like a really satisfying conversation. And I think mostly it was because we had the right people in the room who could answer questions. So it wasn't just like, my hands are tied or I don't have the answer, but an actual exchange of information. And hopefully that happens in the future. And I don't know, I mean, that would be really for Gary to determine who could be sent to the meeting so that we can really talk. But it seems like that could potentially improve the relationship, so that there isn't, I mean, just a shift from like, we used to be, you know, asked by DOE leadership to like, for our comments, like kind of like, please be this voice to get more funding for cleanup. And it feels like it's just shifted so much to don't expect more, like lower your expectations, stop asking for so much, which just feels like really the wrong message to be sending to your advocates, since the president's budget is DOE's budget. Instead of being like, okay, we really need your help to hit this message home that we need more funding. Look at the Lifecycle report, like, please help us. And I'm maybe hopeful that more, having more frequent conversations could get us there, but it's hard to know. It feels a little challenging.
Well,
Thanks.
yeah, it is challenging. Thanks. Thank you.
Oh. Do either of the Steves want to weigh in? Dan Solitz.
Yes, this is probably a double hit for the life cycle cost thing too, but if there was some way we could really dig into and help DOE with the hotel load, the carrying costs, the mission support, safety, and all of that, if we could get a really good clear picture of that and then apply ourselves to figure out how to trim that down, I think we could make a really significant and appreciated contribution to the cost of doing the project, as well as making it easier on DOE.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's possible for sure. That's good.
Steve Anderson is going to call in. He's having some audio issues. So let's go to Steve Wigman, and then we'll check with Steve Anderson when we can hear him.
Yeah, thank you. I would observe that relationship has certainly changed over the years. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's anything we can ask for right now that would result in a change. And I think that when we ask for a change, it almost comes out like an irritant to folks who can't do anything. So it's kind of a catch-22, and I'm sorry I don't have any wisdom to offer.
Okay.
Steve Anderson, are you there? Tom, you're the last member I've got. It's not that we don't want to hear from agency folks or contractors. You're certainly welcome. Traditionally, they don't say much. So,
No,
and some of them are actually uncomfortable when I call on them, and my intent is not to make them uncomfortable.
right. Yeah, my comment on this this round robin is that we've had a lot of issues before us, before the EIC, before our BCC committee, related to our BCC activities and requests. And based on all that, the three items that I've kind of fallen to, if you will, to improve relationships is, number one, a cooperative teamwork attitude between us, the BCC, and the HAB in general, with DOE locally. Secondly, supportive communication. We've seemed to have had, for one reason or another, a very difficult time in getting a forum that we can communicate with the proper people at DOE in terms of presentations or even discussion level items and decisions. And thirdly, DOE has a great philosophy that we've heard a number of times, and that is assume noble intent in both directions. And I think that's very important in this case because, as Steve just said, oftentimes we get the feeling that our requests and what we feel are our needs for the BCC and HAB are viewed upon as irritations to DOE because little can be done. Instead of just accepting that, I think the communications, the cooperative teamwork, and assuming noble intent on both sides could really open the door to finding a common ground. But that would be my suggestion. So Steve Anderson.
Yeah. Steve Anderson, are you on the phone with us? *6 will get you off of mute.
Well, it looks like we're gonna have to pass.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there
he is.
Yeah, you go.
No worries. Yeah, it really follows the same line. How do we bring up dialogue without being irritating? We clearly need to sit down with them and really just discuss this at the heart of the issue so that they understand we're not trying to be an irritant, we're trying to be helpful, and that's all we really can do.
Okay. That's true.
Right. Glad we got you connected, Steve.
There you go.
Some days the technology just does it to us. Fastest round robin in the HAB.
Yeah, well, that's we knew it was going to be a little shorter today, but this is our first, right, for the BCC. So I appreciate that input, and I'm sure we'll have longer discussions on these kinds of topics in the future. Thank you all.
So we have a little bit shorter piece on the HAB work plan in this committee, partly because of the timing of this meeting, and partly because a bunch of you have already been through this presentation. So Gary, can you do kind of the Cliff Notes version, and we'll get to questions and input?
Sure, I'll be happy to, and hopefully we can go through this fairly quickly. If you can pull up the proposed calendar, please. And as we go along, I just want to let everybody know that the calendar and work plan that you have received in your packet is a draft. It's the conversation starter, and there have been many comments, both with the HAB members and with the regulatory agencies, where there will be some changes to this. but you have to start somewhere. So this is pretty much what we're looking at. And like I said, most of you have sat through this almost as many times as I have. Let's see. In fact, I think Steve Anderson, have you sat through any of these through other committees before? Because I don't want to insult anybody.
Steve gave you a thumbs up there, Gary.
Okay, so I take that means that you've been through it before. So a quick high level is that the calendar that you see is pretty much what it is that we've seen before. The major changes are we're looking to kind of split some things up for some shorter days. We're looking to add an evening component for board meetings to be able to excuse me, be more accessible to the public and bring in more voices outside of the HAB to have that dialogue. And the presentation meetings for the board will be more of a dialogue and conversation type format rather than just heavy presentation and death by PowerPoint. We want to be able to enhance that communication, and we're going to give it a try and see how that works. The light blue blocks that you see on there are fairly new, adding committee of the whole to tackle some of the cross-cutting issues that we have, and so that everybody can get a chance to get involved. Committee of the wholes, of course, we haven't had one in more than 2 years. We're having our first one again here in about a month, and going over some issues there. And we want to try and keep that drumbeat going of collaboration and discussion. And so that's why we're looking at trying to do that quarterly. Topics will be open to whatever is necessary for the board to either tackle as board issues, or if there's other side issues. So those will be flexible as we go along. Okay. Any questions on the calendar so we can slip over to the draft work plan?
Doesn't
Okay.
preclude questions. It's just going to change what you're looking at.
Sure.
Gary, one question for you on
Yes,
the
sir.
calendar, basically. For the board meeting, the evening board meetings, are they, that's when the upper DOE management and the key personnel for DOE would be involved with those discussions. Will those folks not be present during the next day working meeting?
The intent is for them to be at the presentation meeting so that public has access to them. And then the next day would be a discussion. It's very similar to the format that we have right now, where during board meetings, they'll typically come in on the Wednesday morning and be present for that and give the updates, and then they step away. And then we get into either additional discussions or additional presentations or discussions and board business after that. So it's not changing a whole lot other than shifting that to the evening. Hope that
Okay,
answers
thank
your
you.
question.
Right, yes, it does.
Okay, next page, we've got the work plan, and the formatting is very similar to what we have this year. And, just some changes here or there, nothing spectacular. We do have comment in here that meetings are recorded and posted on the YouTube page, hanford.gov. Also have descriptions of committees and what it is that we're kind of looking for out of the committees. A note on there for the Executive Issues Committee that is pretty much a leadership type meeting, and that anybody beyond leadership should be invited and agreed upon. Had a little bit of an issue with that, but frankly, I'm not going to get wound up about that because it's a leadership type issue on there. But that is predominantly what we're looking at right now. And Tom, you've got a question?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take questions throughout here, but I had a few of them. And this one, on this section for committees, the Budget and Contracts Committee is, in my opinion, inadequate to describe the level of effort and the types of effort that the BCC expects to be involved in. And for example, I would add some words to that if we can. I don't know if we're probably not doing that today, but I mean, in the leadership workshop, what I would bring up to add is not only we track annual cleanup priorities, but also we issue consensus advice to DOE on that subject. And in addition, the BCC provides review and informed advice on other documents and topics related to Hanford cleanup budgets and contracts. And I've listed some examples of that. So it's much, in our opinion, Gary, and I think I'm speaking for the committee, but please chime in on other members if you have a different feel. In my opinion, the Budget and Contracts Committee is involved in a lot more than just the one annual piece of advice. And it should be recognized here for that.
And that is actually something that's inferred for all the committees. Because all the committees get involved with things that are of interest or within the scope of that particular committee. And in fact, at the graph that's that opens this section, it says that consists of the following committees, which may develop related advice for consideration by the full board. So we hit this, we just don't have it broken out for each committee. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
So just Tom, just so you know, this is the BCC version. We didn't do it for PIC because we didn't think about it on Monday, but each committee's ending up with this sort of red line version that I will send to you and Emmett and the TPA agencies after this meeting. So you have crib notes going into the leadership workshop.
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you.
And then we're also to tackle along with what Ruth said is every committee except for the PIC, because we didn't think about it until then, is doing the same thing. And we're going to consolidate the comments. And I've got a meeting next week with regulators so that we can discuss and consolidate some of the comments and see what we can work on and what we can't. And we're fully expecting that the document that you see today is not the document that you'll see again in when we do the EIC next week. And we expect it to be revised even more once we get to the leadership workshop. Like I said, this is just the conversation starter. We came in fully expecting changes.
So I'm going to be over in Richland next week for a bunch of different things. I will get with Josh on Monday and pull out the conversation from the PIC meeting so that goes into that meeting and that conversation. It just won't look like this. So I've got Dan Solitz, Steve Wigman, and Jerry Paulette. Dan.
Yes, on this section that Tom just talked about, I think we also just need to throw in contracts. And I think there's two specific areas that I'd like the Budget and Contracts Committee to kind of keep their eye on. One is the process for incentive pay, how that's determined and what determines it. And then the other is tracking the new contracting control method, the IDIQ. And I think we need to keep an eye on how that's going and be informed.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you, Dan.
Dan, you said process for what pay? I don't think I caught it accurately.
It's saying when the contractors do a really good job, then they get a chunk of change. So if we get a clearer picture of how that works.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm using the right words. I just want to make sure I get the.
Well, I'm not sure I'm using them either, but I see notifications in the VM newsletter from time to time about how this contractor got this amount of money and that contractor got that amount of money for doing such a fine job. And they probably are. I'm not contesting that. I would just like the Budget and Contracts Committee to have a clearer idea of what's going on there and get some subject matter experts in to tell us about it.
Jerry and Harold used to understand all that. Steve Wigman.
Yeah, that used to be called award fee. Depends on how the contract is written. This red line kind of brings up a question of how we work our way through this space where DOE has made it clear they don't want us involved, and that is contracts and budgets. I'm not saying I have the answer, but this is not only red type, it's a red flag. And I just don't want to. I want to find a way to work through a non-antagonistic relationship with DOE on these points, because they are important points. I just don't know the best way to work through them. And I'm curious if DOE is willing to have conversations about how we might pursue those topics in a way that's constructive for all of us.
Steve, that's a good question. And I think we may be able to talk about systems and how they work. However, once you start to get into specific contracts and things like that, that's outside of the HAB's purview. And there is a fine line. And what I can do is take this back to my folks. I think maybe a discussion of how incentive pay works as a general concept is probably something that could be discussed. But once you start getting into how a specific contractor performed, then you're getting into business sensitive information, and there's a lot of confidentialities that go along with that. And so we'd have to figure out where that line is, but I appreciate the comment.
Jerry.
There we go. Well, I don't see how you can say, really, Gary, that contracts are somehow outside the purview of a cleanup board when that's where the work is done. And we have traditionally been invited to participate in discussion about RFPs. And we have accolades from DOE headquarters for having improved contracting. We used to spend a lot of time on contract reform and help DOE develop its incentive program. And such innovations as having an equal incentive along with penalty for going faster versus missing schedules was something that this board led the work on, and DOE headquarters, applauded. And I think if we're talking about how you get cleanup accomplished, then it's important to have a discussion about the structure of the contract and how it's applied and what the work incentives are. If the work incentives don't match up, as we said in the past when we were looking at the major contracts, to TPA expectations, for example, that's a problem. And ecology and EPA joined us in saying that our contract advice was very important in that front. So I think there is a difference between asking whether or not we're involved in a performance evaluation as opposed to what the contracts look like and how they incentivize or don't incentivize work. We also put in a lot of time and led the nation in review of overhead costs of contractors, which saved the Energy Department hundreds of millions of dollars, our work, and drew national accolades until the Energy Department said we're not disclosing overheads anymore. So I would say that it's important for us to have that as part of the conversation. And the question is, what is the appropriate level, not whether or not you have it. I also put in chat, separate issue, that I hadn't heard in your prior discussions that the EIC meetings would be closed. And I'm going to flag that because we've had this discussion and frankly fight before. Ecology said before it can't attend, and I would insist that it not attend any closed door meeting that violates what is in the ground rules as meetings of the board are open, and that includes its executive committee along with any other committee. FACA may not require that, but the state does. And I'm just going to flag that, and for our ecology reps, that's closing the door. I mean, it's not like you've got 50 people who want to attend an executive issue committee meeting. But if someone does want to attend, it needs to be open.
So, Jerry, I would welcome your advice. Part of this was triggered by some folks who, I can't remember if at the time they weren't appointed or they had just been appointed. It was in that odd time. And it was less about attendance and more about jumping in and the meeting getting derailed.
Well, you can, just like any other meeting, you have a facilitator. People who aren't participants don't have to be given the right to speak during the meeting, but you can't close the meeting. And we have that in our ground rules, and it's important. So I'm just, for an example, if a reporter wants to attend an EIC meeting, God bless them for wanting to do it, but if they wanted to, it would be a horrible black eye to say no.
Yeah, we had a very difficult EIC meeting, and we repeatedly asked folks to participate less, and it was a really bad meeting.
But I think this is a good point, and it's something we probably should raise again when we try to look at these comments in the workshop at least, and in the EIC meeting both.
Yeah, but right. So I've
Thanks,
got Brian and Chris, right? Brian.
Ruth, can you just flag that in a comment on the document, and I will plan to talk about that with DOE and EPA at our work plan review meeting next week.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that up, Jerry.
Thanks.
That's why I'm glad we have these dialogues so we can go through and collect comments and make this a better document.
Chris.
Just some words or some thoughts that we might add about the contracts part. BCC served as the center point to collect and compile comments on the upcoming tank farms RFP in the public comment period, and that's something that we could do on other such RFPs that are out for public comment that are relevant to Hanford.
That's a good point, Chris. We have done that numerous times now. That's right. So Gary, can we move on? Did you want to make other points to summarize the document?
That's all I have for this, and we can keep on moving.
Yeah, on this section, my only comments, and I guess we won't take up the time for the BCC to address this much in detail, but I do have a number of comments that I would suggest adding the BCC into this list of, well, this is board meeting presentations.
Board meetings. So you want to go
There's
down
another
to committee
section.
meetings?
Yeah, on the committee meeting section, I think at least, maybe not all 4 of these bulleted categories, but at least 3 of the 4 bulleted categories, I had suggestions for BCC topics to be discussed on specific dates. So I guess I don't know how we want to handle that. I don't want to take up a lot of time today, but Ruth, can I provide you with those comments and maybe we can incorporate them into our red line version that you're creating?
Yeah, or I can send you the red line version and you can pop it back to me.
Okay, that would work too. I don't want to cut anybody off here, but this is clear. There's only one show up here for the BCC that Ruth highlighted in yellow. That's woefully inadequate. And I'd like to make sure that we have other aspects of our work covered here. So I'll do that.
Okay, so I'll send this to you right after the meeting so you can.
Okay.
You can send me the regular 11 p.m. email.
Thanks.
So the thing here as we go through this, and I know some of you have seen this, there's a listing of proposed kind of topics for the board meetings going through the year. There are the committee of the whole meetings that are plugged in that you saw in the light blue. There are the committee meetings that are sort of come in pairs. And there have been discussions in other committees about how those pairs should be carved up or not carved up. The executive issues committee meetings that are also slotted in on the calendar. And then for each committee is sort of this consolidated topic list for each of the committees. Steve Wigman.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize if I'm a little late with this thought, but as part of the development of the priority advice, I think it would really be an asset to the membership to have briefings on the 5-year plan and the EM strategic vision separate from the actual priority discussion so that people understand what the philosophy is of DOE in pursuing the missions. And then that could easily lead to discussion of our view of priorities. But you were looking for some topics to add to some of your meetings, and it seems like those kinds of informational discussions would be really helpful.
Yep. You
and
bet.
the line it's number 2 here under BCC. This update to the 5-year plan and 10-year vision actually is under every single one of the committees. That was one of the requests from last year's work plan, that every committee have that on its list.
Okay.
So I'll send this to Tom and Emmett and the TPA agencies. The other thing for you all is, since Tom is your representative at the leadership workshop, which is next month, what other topics or issues do you want him to carry forward from this committee for that group to work on? In addition to the work plan, is there other stuff you want him to move forward?
There are a couple that we're going to identify towards the end of this meeting today that you should be aware of are coming up, and some of which will be discussed at the leadership workshop. So I'll mention those at the time. But yeah, if you have any topics on your mind, please identify them here.
Chris?
Well, we might talk about contingency and risk. I know we had a talk on risk, but I'm talking about risk in the in a little down a little bit more in the estimating sense, because I think, as we'll see today, it's kind of critical to understanding scope, schedule, and cost. And it does fit into contingency, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last year or so about how does contingency work on this site. We've never really had a good explanation of it or any input to it from our end.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, I guess, Ruth, we're close to a break, right?
Yeah, so when we come back, I'll let you know the results of the election, and we'll talk about the life cycle report. So let's take a break until 2:15.
Sounds good. Ruth, one more comment before we leave this completely, and it's really towards Gary. Gary, we're raising issues here in terms of adding items and so forth in to reflect what we think the BCC workload should be and interest level should be. Before we harden any positions on both sides, this is an excellent example of the need for DOE and us, representatives from the HAB and from DOE, to discuss the limitations and what can be supported. I'd really like to see that cooperative discussion in an open ranging format that we can talk about these things to reach some conclusion on what we can and what we can't get, as opposed to saying, nope, can't get it. It's not directed to provide that kind of thing to us. Before we get to that point, I'd really like to have a discussion on what's possible. So thank you.
Sure. And I also look forward to your comments on this document so I can make this a better document.
Sounds good. See y'all at 2:15. Okay, yeah, just a quick comment, Chris, if I could.
Sure.
Chris, and I appreciate Chris's involvement here. He's done a review of this report, which is quite extensive, and he's going to summarize it for us first, and I guess we can ask questions, but I'd almost like you to get through your summary, and if you want to take questions, feel free to do that, Chris. But we'll have some time after your presentation to also ask questions to get some clarification.
Okay, thanks, Tom. This report is 245 pages long, and it's crammed full of tables, charts, and just jam-packed with information. So at best, I can just touch on a few points that I think will be of interest. Tom has given links to this life cycle report in invitations to this committee meeting. And I put down another link here. This will actually get you to a page which gives links to all the life cycle reports that have been produced at Hanford from 2011 through 2022. So if you want to go back and look at other life cycle reports, this link is a good one to do it. A few other general things. All the information in this report was available to whoever wrote it prior to August 31st, 2021. Any information subsequent to August 31st, 2021 is not taken into account in this report. And the last thing I want to say generally is a comment period on this report has now been extended to April 30th of this year. So if you have comments that you would like to submit as a stakeholder, please send those comments to Tom and myself, and we'll compile them and send them in as a group to the comment period, or to
Chris,
the comment entity.
Chris, one point on that. I thought during our earlier discussion with this meeting that Steve was suggesting that we submit after a consensus review by the HAB in June. So if we did consolidate, we still need the comments in from our BCC members, particularly that you and I can consolidate into a letter form. But if, Steve, if you feel that the best way to do this would be to have the HAB review that letter and approve it as consensus in June, we can do that instead of a stakeholder letter.
Okay. Next slide, please, Ruth. Looking up at top, I've annotated various parts of the slide, and I may not speak to all the annotations, but this report is required by milestone M3601. And the milestone now says that this LCR, life cycle report, will be submitted every 3 years. So the next one will be out probably in early 2025. Scroll up a little bit, please. There are two sets of numbers in this report, and Tom has addressed this a little earlier, and I'm just going to say one or two words about it. The baseline planning case, which is called a low range cost estimate, totals $300.2 billion over the lifetime of the project, which is 2078. That's when they cut off the lifetime of this project with an asterisk, and we'll see. They also have a high range estimate of $640.6 billion, which incorporates risks due to high amount of technical uncertainty and schedule uncertainty. So those very high technical complexity and schedule uncertainty risks are moved into the higher range estimate. Next slide. I want to say a few words about how DOE structures work. And I want to talk about the baseline summary. Now, when I first got into DOE world, I understood it was called a PBS, meant project breakdown structure, but it seems like now that project baseline summary is the preferred usage. And a PBS is simply a grouping of work activities that has associated with it technical work scope, schedule, and cost. And as work progresses in, you can look at how your spending goes against your budgeted cost and funding. But I'm mentioning PBS because this is the way in this report that congressional funding or that cost estimates are broken out. They're broken out by PBS. Now I want to talk a little bit about work breakdown structure too, because this report also gives cost associated with work breakdown structure levels. A work breakdown structure is kind of like an organization chart, only instead of an org chart for people, it's an org chart for work. And it shows how work activities are related to one another and how they go from higher level work down to lower level work. And this is kind of critical because when you do risk assessment, when you determine risk and the cost of schedule risk and cost risk and technical risk in DOE world, you start at the lower levels of this project breakdown structure, and then you compile it and you accumulate these risks as you work upward to the upper work projects. And we'll see that a little bit. Scroll up a little bit, Ruth. I don't think we can see anything here.
Keep.
Well, what I wanted to say is two things. Is the life cycle report does calculate cost and schedule risk for each PBS and for other levels of the PBS. And these costs are broken out, these risks and cost and schedule risk are broken out so we can see what those costs actually are. And I'll show you examples of that going forward. Okay, we need about the third or fourth slide.
So we were at work breakdown. Okay, so here we go.
Yeah, I think it's the fourth page.
Uncertainty and
Okay.
project risk.
Yeah, right there. So I've talked a little bit about project risk. And cost and schedule uncertainty, they have cost associated with them. And these are shown, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. I will say this at the outset is this report doesn't go into much more detail about how risk is calculated and what risk relates to than the words that you see here. Equally important is when we look at the cost of the various work activities here, these costs are represented in escalated dollars. That is, escalation takes into account inflation. And so when we see the costs going out, especially in out years, out to 2078, they're not in today's dollars, they're in escalated dollars. And DOE has used an escalation rate between 2 and 4% per year. Now, what we don't know and what you can't find out from this report is, does it mean there's a constant escalation rate of say like 3% between 2 and 4? Does it mean that 2% is used for some work projects, 4% for others, or that for a given project, it might use a 2% escalation for some aspects of the project and 4% for others? We don't know that, and you can't get it from this report, but they are in escalated dollars. Now, scroll up a little bit to the next slide. Now, the report gives costs for all 10 RL PBSs. These are the 10 PBSs that RL has. PBS 13, solid waste stabilization, disposition for the 200 area. 20 is safeguards and security. 30 is soil and water remediation, and you can read the rest yourself. There is an RL called LTS for long-term stewardship, and there's an RL PBS that doesn't have a name yet. That's for final reactor disposition. There are 3 ORP PBSs, radioactive liquid tank waste stabilization, disposition. This is the big one. Major construction for the waste treatment and immobilization plant. This is high-level waste part of it. And then waste treatment immobilization for plant operations. This PBS goes away. All the money in this PBS, $50 million for 2022, is rolled into ORP 14, and this doesn't appear in any of the out years. Any money in it is in this one here. The funding is shown not only for PBSs but to level 2. This is the next level down, and this kind of shows. I'll scroll up just a little bit, Ruth. Okay, well, scroll down a little bit. This kind of shows a little bit of the work breakdown structure. So using RL 0040 as an example, nuclear facility D&D for the remainder of Hanford. For example, a level 2 might be remediation of geographic areas, and then a level 3 might have all of these work levels for the different areas, different geographical areas. And if we go down, scroll down a little bit more, in real complex PBSs, you can actually get down to 5 or 6 levels. And this gives another example where a level 2 might be MinSafe and compliant facilities and waste sites. Then it might be Central Plateau Nuclear Facilities MinSafe, then U-Plant MinSafe, then U-Plant MinSafe Maintenance, and U-Plant MinSafe Corrective Maintenance. But at the lowest level of work for a given PBS, that's where the risk starts. The project controls people, your project manager will get together at the lowest level of work and say, what risks do we have associated with it? What are the cost uncertainties? What are the schedule uncertainties? And then they roll upward, the risks do, and they're accumulated ultimately at the PBS level or even higher. Scroll down a little bit to the next slide. Down a little bit more. Now, Tom has showed, well, up a little bit more. We can't get it all on the screen. Tom has showed this before. This shows the escalated cost spending for all of Hanford, all the PBSs, both RL and ORP, for the baseline case, low range estimate. And you can see how they vary year by year. And when you get out to 2078, what you see going out here are long-term stewardship and also some cost and schedule cost estimates. And we'll show you examples of that a little bit more. So everything out here is cost associated with schedule, duration, and long-term stewardship. You can see that this year we're getting about $2.7 billion for 2022, and you can see that the cost estimate for work for this year in this report is about $3 billion, so we're short. If we get about 2.7 billion going forward, you can see that could be severely underfunded. However, we don't know how much this work in the out years represents real project costs, that is new construction, new things happening, versus just escalation due to inflation. But we'll take a look at that in a minute. If we scroll down to the orange, you can see the high range. Now, this high range apparently represents cost, technical uncertainty risk, and schedule risk in excess of that in the low range. But you can see that the complexity then can jack it up to about $640 billion. Pretty substantial amount. And at least in some of the out years, you're looking at cost in excess of $14 billion a year, should some of this technical complexity really transpire. Okay, next slide. This shows, and I don't think we've seen this before, but this shows how the different RL and ORP PBSs contribute to the overall cost as we go through the out years. You can see that the 900-pound gorilla is ORP 0014. This is basically operation at DF law, any construction activities, so on and so forth. 060 is the high-level waste treatment plant construction, but not operation. Safeguards and security is this one right here. Hanford budget for outreach activities like public relations, regulatory support, and Hanford Advisory Board is a thin yellow line right here. Waste disposition, true disposition is given by 13C, and we'll go into this in more detail. RL 30, which is groundwater and Central Plateau, is given here. Reactor disposition is given by this one. Long-term stewardship you see here. So this gives you just a chart of how the different PBSs go. But in the report, you can find in Appendix C a year-by-year actual number for what the cost is, not only at the PBS level, but at level 2 work activities in there. And I'll show you examples of that going forward. Next slide, please. Thomas showed this slide. But this just shows the breakdown in total cost for RL, ORPs, and RL PBSs and ORP PBSs. So in the low range, in the baseline case, looks that RL through 2078 will cost about $81 billion, while ORP, DFLAW, and high-level waste and related activities will be about $219 billion. If we take into account the risk and uncertainties that result in the high-level range, there's about a 40% increase in RL to 113, but there's about a 250% increase in ORP to 527. So your major uncertainties, and I don't think this would surprise us, are really associated with what's going on with the tank farms, with DFLAW, and with the high-level waste processing facility. And this just shows another graph. It shows ORP superimposed, and this is for low level upon RL, and how they go on a yearly basis out to 2078. Now, I'm going to take another look, go into a little bit more detail in the next several slides. So let's have the next one, Ruth. What I did is I went back and looked at all the life cycle reports to see how the baseline low range cost estimates have changed over the years. And from 2011 to 2016, you can see that there is a fairly narrow range of costs. It didn't differ very much, from about $107 million to about $115 billion. Very little change. Then all of a sudden in the 2019 life cycle report, we jump up to a total low range cost of $323 billion, and now in this one about $300 billion. So there are major changes going from 2016 to 2019. And looking at the 2019 report, I gather that they were due to changes in milestones in the amended consent decree of 2016, but also in System Plan 8, the baseline case, the baseline scenario in System Plan 8 suddenly called for a significant increase in cost, and the life cycle report then emulated that baseline case in System Plan 8. But these major jump up and changes are mostly due to changes in the tank farm and DFLAW PBSs. Next slide. Now, the other thing I did, and I'll look at a couple slides, is I put all of the PBS costs into a spreadsheet so I could superimpose escalation rates on it. Because I was curious to see, especially in the out years, how cost related to escalation rates. So for example, in 2022, Hanford has about $2.7 billion. If we continue to get more or less flat funding over the out years, represented by the purple line, you'd see that we'd be really significantly underfunded going forward. It would just drive the schedule out to who knows where. If we look at, say, a 2% escalating at 2% every single year, you would have the blue line. If we escalated at 3% every single year, you'd have the orange line. And if we escalated at 4% every single year, you'd have the red line. Now, this is kind of simplistic, I know, but it shows a couple things. First, if we look at 2022 to about 2036, regardless of these escalation rates, the life cycle report has cost estimates significantly above any of these escalation rates. So funding is going to be really critical over the next 15 years. I think we're in a significant underfunded situation. Now, if we get congressional appropriations, especially in the out years, that actually do reflect inflation, as long as they're in the 2 or 3% range, we might not be so bad. but we don't know at all if that's going to happen. And the reason I mention this, and mention especially 3%, is in my last 6 years at Hanford, the amount of money we got for salary increases, salary adjustments for my last 6 years was about 3% a year. So Hanford has a really substantial workforce of about 10,000 people. If we continue to get 3% a year, that's going to be a significant increase in salary load for out years, unless we have a significant drop off in our workforce. So one of the nice things that it would really be nice to see going forward, or to get from DOE, is how much of all these costs represent salaries of our workforce. If we're to keep a competitive workforce, if we continue to hire people as older folks retire, competitiveness is going to be key, especially in this day and age. And so 3% year to year may not be sufficient going forward, and you may find these costs going up to reflect higher salary adjustments in the out years. Next slide. Now I took a look at both RL and ORP in relation to inflation rates too, and it's kind of interesting. So for example, RL has a little bit more than $1 million in 2022. If that's all it gets, a little bit more than $1 million going forward in the out years, you can see that the discrepancy between cost estimates and flatline funding isn't so bad for a large number of out years. But we will be underfunded in several of those out years for 5 to 10 year periods. But like the slide I just showed you, regardless of what escalation rates are used, you can see that for maybe the next 10 or 15 years, RL will be in a potential underfunding scenario relative to the estimated cost of work, at least estimated in this plan. So I think that's something that we want to kind of bear in mind. Again, I think especially for RL, I think personnel cost, the salary of the workforce, is probably a major contributor. I think there are fewer construction projects, fewer capital projects going forward, maybe for RL than for ORP. Let's skip the 2 slides, Ruth. We'll skip the next one and go on there. Now, in the report, it goes into detail into 4 major areas. It looks at PBSs in the Central Plateau. It looks at PBSs as it's divided along the river corridor. It looks at tank waste PBSs, and then it looks at mission support PBSs. But it gives the same type of information for each of these areas. I'm only going to look at one PBS in the Central Plateau, but I will go through some of the information that's given just to let you know that the same identical type of information is given in each of the other 3 areas: river corridor, tank waste, and the mission support. So the first thing it shows in each of these 4 divisions of PBSs is it goes through the milestones that are either being negotiated or that are in abeyance. And it gives milestones being negotiated or in abeyance on a PBS basis. So here, for example, it says M91 series for RL13C are being negotiated with a little bit of text. Then it gives the milestones with IAMIT termination. All these are in abeyance right now. And the significance of these, unless if they continue to be in abeyance, if they continue to be in negotiation, then that adds schedule and scope uncertainty with associated risk and cost into, say, the next report. Let's scroll up a little bit, Ruth. The next thing you see for each of these 4 areas are central cleanup tri-party agreement milestones with completion dates by PBS. So for 13C, solid waste stabilization and disposition PBS, it shows what the compliance dates are. Say for your groundwater VADO zone, RL30, it gives you the PBSs and the compliance dates, and many of these are TBD. Let's go further, Ruth. Next slide. It tells you for the up a little bit. Up one more. Yeah, it tells you by PBS if there are milestones at risk. For example, for RL30, the milestone at risk is complete RFS for record facility investigations that are related to this milestone. If we go then down a little bit more for RL40, it gives again the compliance dates and a little bit more. Let's go to the next table. And that's all it for RL42, and that's all it gives. Then it gives a description of the level 2 work scope. So for solid waste stabilization, RL13, these are the next level down work scopes. Project management, WESF, canister storage facility, mixed low-level waste trenches, transuranic waste retrieval, true repackaging, T-plant, central work complex. Next slide, Ruth. True disposition, special nuclear fuels disposition, low-level waste burial ground, sludge treatment phase 2, management of cesium and strontium capsules, and so on. And it gives level 2 for the river corridor PBSs, the tank waste PBSs, as we'll see, mission support PBSs, with a description of what's there. Next slide. It also gives you then, for each of the cleanup areas, assumptions and uncertainties associated with both the low range cost estimate and the high range cost estimate. So for 13C, for example, it assumes that no treatment facilities are required to support longer WTP operations. It assumes for example, that WIP will remain operational through the end of Hanford cleanup operations that have the potential to generate true waste, and it assumes that we can ship true waste to WIP until 2050. It assumes that some national geological repository will be available to accept nuclear fuel shipment from Hanford beginning in 2048. If these aren't available, then there's risk and cost and schedule duration associated with it that have been built in, presumably, to the low range estimate. High range estimate, these are the risks assumptions that you see. And if any of these happen, then that jacks up, that adds to the high range cost estimate. And it goes through and has this for the other PBSs as well. So this is pretty handy thing to know for us, I think going forward. Next slide. So this shows you how just for one PBS, solid waste stabilization and disposition, how the estimated costs go from now through 2078. And what you see after this are risk estimates, but as I'll show you, we don't know what work is related to these, how these cost estimates related to risk, how those relate to work. The spike you see right here turns out to be a 1-year tremendous spike for true waste repackaging. And I will say that the high level cost estimate for this PBS is 21.2 billion. So not a tremendous increase relative to what we'll see for, say, for another one of the ORP PBSs. Next slide, Ruth. And this shows you how all the level 2 work scope is how it goes out through 2078. The big cost contributor here, the major cost one, is actually operation of ERDF. That's what this green line is, ERDF. The next biggest contributor to cost is actually this one here, which is cost and schedule uncertainty. So these are risks associated with cost and schedule uncertainty, and they're the next largest contributor of all the relative to any other PBSs. You have project management as a major contributor, and the next biggest one is true repackaging due to this 1-year spike right here. And you'll get this for every single PBS. The level shows you how the level 2 work scope goes from 2022 to 2078. Next slide, please. Then in Appendix C, it shows you for every single year from 2022 to 2078, the estimated cost by a level 2 work scope, and then it totals it for each year. And these totals are what I put in a spreadsheet to get those to superimpose escalations on it. So that's where I got the data. I did this for every PBS to get those charts I showed you, put them on a spreadsheet, totaled them up, and then put on the escalation rates. Next slide. Now this shows you, this is the very last table for this in Appendix C for this TBS, but it still shows you cost and schedule going out to 2090, but there's no work associated with it. And so this is really cost association with some work that's going out to 2090 that's not reflected in any of these level 2s. So that's one of the things that I don't know what it is, and the report doesn't tell you what it is. But for the last page in this, for every PBS, it totals up the total cost by level 2 work, and you can see what these are. So I said before, the big hitter here is ERDF at 3.6 billion. Then you have project management at 2.9 billion. Cost and schedule uncertainty is 1.6 billion. Oh, IDF at 1.98 billion, and then true repackaging at 1.35 billion. So these are your big hitters here. Next slide, please. Now for the tank waste cleanup, and this is a 900-pound gorilla in the tent. Again, we see the same kind of thing. It starts out by showing you what the milestones are, what the completion dates for those milestones are, and there's several pages of these, and here you can see, at least on the first page for these milestones, there's a lot of them that are supposed to be completed in 2022 and 2023. You can see what they are. I won't say anything. You can just kind of eyeball it down the table. Next slide. Continuing that table has the milestones on the left and some. Now, these are some interesting things, these TBDs. For example, now this is remember, this is as of a lockdown of 2021, August 31st. But the law facility hot commission complete at that time was TBD. Complete removal of tank waste from all the SSTs in these tank farms was a TBD at that date. Complete closure waste management C was a TBD at that date. And submit this tier 3 closure plan was a TBD. Even more interesting are the milestones that were considered to be at risk as of that date. Let's scroll up a little bit. Completion of the tank waste SST, this tank waste retrieval in 2022 is considered to be at risk. I don't think that's true, but High-level waste facility substantially complete was considered to be at risk. That is, as of 2030. The pretreatment facility complete by 12/31/2031, considered to be at risk. Hot start of WTP by 2033, considered to be at risk. Complete closure of all the SST farms by 2040-43 was considered to be at risk. Complete pre-treatment and processing and vitrification of high-level waste and raw tank waste by 2047 considered to be at risk. So it'll be interesting going forward to see if these are pushed out. They're considered to be at risk, because if so, that's going to push our schedule out substantially from 2078. Next slide. So this is the profile of ORP-14. This is a 900-pound gorilla. You can see the total cost through in this case, 2074 is 199.6 billion. But the high level cost, and we don't have a chart like this, it's not in the life cycle report, but just the total is, and the high level cost is almost $500 billion, 496.3, so about 2.5 times the low level cost. Pretty substantial, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the risk in there going forward, what contributes to that 2.5 times jump between 199.6 and almost 500 billion. Next slide, Ruth. Then it shows you how the costs are distributed by level 2 work. So base operations, this is project management, analytical laboratory support. I'll have to read this here. Provides for safe storage of waste, reduces the volume of waste through evaporation, provides laboratory support, includes necessary support activities. That's what it says for base operations. What surprised me was the cost here called supplemental treatment. Supplemental treatment, this report does assume it's going to require supplemental treatment. It includes the planning and analysis for supplemental low activity waste treatment and contact handled true waste handling, up to and including design and construction. The work element also includes operations of supplemental low activity waste treatment facility. This is a pretty substantial amount of cost here associated with this. The low level waste and high level waste treatment is represented by this bar, by this profile. The profile for retrieving, including SSTs, you see here. For waste feed delivery and treatment planning for DST retrieval is here. Facility closures, the tank operations contract and ORP project support is here. And the cost and/or schedule uncertainty is here. I would have expected a higher amount of cost and schedule uncertainty, but apparently it was so significant that most of the cost and schedule uncertainty was moved into the high level $500 billion category instead of being placed here. Next slide. This shows the last page of Appendix C of the year-by-year cost. And I didn't want to show it from starting in 2022. I wanted to show the end of it. There, again, starting in 2021, starting in 2070, there's assumed to be no cost or schedule uncertainty. There are no work activities level 2 or level 3 planned beyond 2074. And these are the total costs then of your level 2 work activities. Your base operations is almost 57 billion. Supplemental treatment is 45 billion. Law and high level waste treatment is 42 billion. And everything else is pretty minor. And you can see that cost and schedule uncertainty is 7 billion, pretty small potatoes compared to some of these others. Let's go to the next slide, Ruth. There are a couple things that jumped out at me, and I just wanted to bring these to your attention. And we heard this yesterday for one of these, but there's about a page, maybe a page and a quarter, of assumptions associated with risk and uncertainties with the low level baseline range. And I've just pointed out two of them. One, again, is that every 2.5 years, on average, you have to replace a melter. A melter is assumed to have a 5-year lifetime. This is a lot of replacements, and I don't know how long it's going to take to replace a melter, to take one out, put a new one in. And I don't know if a 2.5 is a good average or not, but potentially there's a lot of schedule risk associated with this item here. The other thing is the law treatment capacity is assumed to be provided by a law supplemental treatment facility located adjacent to WTP, although no particular treatment technology is assumed. Now that's interesting. So we have an uncertainty here that has some cost associated with it, but we don't know what the treatment technology is going to be. I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, in Appendix B in this report assumes that for milestones for which there is no treatment, that has been agreed upon in the milestone. It tells you that you can use an upper bound for a plausible treatment regime. And Appendix B lists plausible different treatments for every milestone for which there is no agreed upon a treatment in that milestone. So presumably one of those plausible treatments for the law supplemental was used, and an upper cost bound was used in order to provide a cost estimate. Now, for the high range estimate, this is something that in the 2 years I've been on the HAB and listening to presentations on ORP, I've never heard this, and I thought this is really interesting. For the WTP law facility, there is a high likelihood that the throughput rate in WTP law facility will not meet the planned 70% operating efficiency, thereby extending the mission duration. High likelihood. I don't know what high likelihood means, whether that means 10% or 90% or somewhere in between, but I've not heard that before. It also says that for the waste treatment plant pretreatment facility, a high likelihood that the WTP process will not operate at the 20% operating efficiency, thereby extending the mission duration. And it says the same thing for the high-level waste facility, considered highly unlikely that it will not operate at the 70% operating efficiency. And you can see why there's a 250% jump in estimated cost between the low-level range and the high-level range, given things like this. And incidentally, there's another 3/4 of a page of assumptions here. And I want to read one of these assumptions to you. I don't have it here, but I want to read it to you. Mission extension, mission extension results in the need for facility replacements and major upgrades. Partial or full replacement of TWCS and the WTP high-level waste facility are considered to be very likely. Full replacements. WTP law, CLW, and PT facilities have a 40-year design life. Each facility is planned to operate between 35 and 40 years. Life extension programs can effectively extend their safe operation for an additional 20 years, potentially. However, if the mission extends beyond this time frame, owing to issues such as funding constraints, lower funding efficiency, so on, these facilities may have to be completely replaced. So it's essential that, in my mind, that all the waste be processed in 35 to 40 years, or we could wind up in a situation where we have to replace everything. And I only have one more slide that I want to show you here, and it's real quick, and that's because it impacts us. This shows the profile, the cost profile for Richland community and regulatory support. This includes the HAB. This year, this is budget $8.7 million. Each one of these escalation increments is $100,000 per year. So right today, between 2022 and 23, that's about 1.1%. When we get here to the out years, you're looking at escalation on the order of 0.7 to 0.8%. So there's not very much escalation for community and regulatory support. Now, what this does in effect is it assures Gary Younger that his salary is going to be good. But at $100,000 per year increase, it doesn't leave much for anything else other than Gary's salary. So while we talk a lot about more diversity and more inclusion, there's not going to be much money to support anything we want to do to how we're going to handle that, other meetings, paying for alternates or whatever. It's if appropriations match this profile, I just don't see if the money is going to be there to do much beyond what we're doing today. And this is all I have to talk about, and I've probably gone past my time a lot, and I apologize for that. So that's it.
Chris, if I can comment, I really appreciate you putting the work in to summarize this and going through a very complicated report. You've done a great job. I only have one question, Chris, and I don't know if you know this or not, but do you know what organization within DOE actually prepared this report?
No, actually I don't. And I asked that question for Gary Younger a couple meetings ago, and he said he would find out.
Oh, okay.
But I assume it's contracted to somebody.
Yeah.
Got at least 3 people in queue. Steve Wigman and then Dan.
Yeah, thank you. That was very informative. I appreciate the work you've done and the way you presented it. Couple questions. One relates to the document as it might be set side by side with the, what's the other one that we're told? The system plan. We're told that the system plan and this document are based on different assumptions and different purposes. Do you have any comment on how they might actually relate? I'm kind of in a fog on that point.
Yeah, I really do. There's not a lot in this document, but it does say that the baseline scenario for System Plan 9, the technical part of the baseline scenario, was used as the basis for the cost estimates here.
Oh, okay.
And when you look at the cost estimate profiles in System Plan 9 for the baseline case, it's not really dissimilar to the cost estimate profile that I showed you for the low range estimate here, with the following exceptions. In System Plan 9, it gives the cost estimate and the profile in unescalated dollars, so in today's dollars. Whereas this report gives it in escalated dollars, so there's that difference. The other thing is, I don't know that System Plan 9, I can't tell from having gone into System Plan 9 whether the cost profiles include cost and schedule uncertainty and their related costs as the profile did here. I don't know that, and I can't tell that.
Thank you, that helps.
Okay, Dan Solitz and then Ann. Dan?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. That was just excellent. I'm going to go back and look at that report again and go through it. It's just really helping me a lot. And this is a request for street legal. If you could isolate this section of the video and give it a special label, because I think this will really be helpful for new people coming onto the board, but also new people coming into the budget and contracts committee. I think this is the real treasure. Thanks again, Chris.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to say too, Dan, is I didn't say anything about appendices A and B in this report, but Appendix A gives a pretty comprehensive listing of every single regulatory document by each PBS. And it also has really good explanation at a simplistic level, which would be good for new people coming in who are unfamiliar with CERCLA, unfamiliar with RECRA, unfamiliar with the types of decision documents that come out of these. It's really a good primer for people who are unfamiliar with it. And Appendix B is really good because it gives a comprehensive listing of all the possible cleanup scenarios you might have where a PBS has not resulted in a ROD or the RCRA equivalent of a ROD. And it goes through plausible treatment scenarios on a PBS by PBS basis. So there's a lot of really good information in those two appendices.
Thank you.
Ann?
Yeah, hello everyone. This is Annie McCartney, project manager with EPA, and I just wanted to share a few of our thoughts from reviewing the report. We do want to make the report better and improve the transparency for the future reports, recognizing that it's capturing a snapshot in time. It's not a plan and not a decision-making document. It serves more as an encyclopedia of all the Hanford activities. Based on the report's level of detail, we're not responding with project level input and priorities, primarily due to the following. Most of the projects were included as a single cost or were combined with other projects, as Chris highlighted a few of those. The schedules are discussed very broadly with no specific activity schedules provided or referenced for reviewer input. And the cost and schedule uncertainty that's applied doesn't have a clear explanation of the basis or consistency between each of the contractors' scope. And I think, again, Chris highlighted a lot of these as well. We did email our comments to DOE and CC'd the HAB email box, so hopefully those are available to you. We provided a list of detailed comments, and then we had a few overarching, more general comments. So to highlight just a few of those again, we felt the decision documents and changes that were far along or approved prior to the cutoff date for that report, the August date mentioned last year, could have been covered more, including the 100 BC ROD and creation of the 200 IA1 OU. Those were kind of cut off at a strange time for those projects and then weren't covered as much in the life cycle report because of that. And it would have been helpful to have more discussion of the basis and application of cost and schedule uncertainty and the high range estimate. You know, of note, there weren't really references provided to what cost estimation guidance is followed or, you know, how those uncertainties were developed. And so that would have been beneficial to cross compare between the different PBSs. And then also just within the PBSs, and this isn't really reflective of the report itself, but more how the work is managed, I guess, between the different PBSs is different. So, you know, I think as RL30 is managed by OU, whereas RL40 by geographic area. So if you're trying to look at start to finish for a specific OU cleanup, it's pretty difficult to track that within this report. So with our comments, we're hoping to assist in making the report as more, you know, more complete, and we recognize there will always be a lot of those high level assumptions that are forming a lot of the basis. But I just wanted to share that, and thanks.
Yeah, Anne, I looked through your comments, and I just received them the day before yesterday, and kind of blew through them. But I agree with you on one particular thing. In my mind, the biggest deficiency of the report was not knowing how the risk and uncertainty and the costs associated with that were derived and what scope they were related to. And particularly as regards the high range estimate, you don't know why certain uncertainty was related to the low range, and you don't really know what went into the high range. So that was the biggest problem that I had with the report, and that was one of the things that EPA mentioned in there as one of their overarching comments too. I noted.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, you pointed out the escalation added in. And I think if you took those two pieces and looked at the raw cost, that'd be an interesting thing. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Other questions before we go to break? Hey, wait a minute.
Yes, I was just curious what sort of comments you're thinking of submitting on the document. And part of my brain is thinking about the small number of people that are listening to this conversation and the big gap between this document and the full understanding of the HAB membership, so that we could actually get some sort of consensus on comments. So curious what your comments are and what your thoughts are on, is it realistic to actually try to pursue a HAB understanding at this point?
Are you asking me, Steve?
Well,
or are you asking, we just put that out generally?
it's kind of a general question, I guess.
My answer is I don't really know. I was hoping that Bob Suyama was going to sit in today, because I felt that some of the uncertainty that we've discussed and some of the risk we discussed, particularly what I just read about a high likelihood that the 70% efficiency for the various treatments will not be met, I kind of thought was something that in the tank waste committee, that would be a really good source of discussion with DOE or other technical experts, because things like that I don't recall having heard before.
Yeah, that is
and
what I have.
And I think those uncertainties contribute to a tremendous amount of potential cost.
If I recall right, that was even an assumption within the development of the system plan, because I do remember Delmar Noyes talking about that issue actually a couple of years ago. I don't know if the knowledge base has improved since then.
Steve, my comment to add to what Chris has indicated in response to your question. If we want to spend the time in the June meeting, and we're probably talking an hour and a half, at least, maybe 2 hours, to get to a general understanding of what we would put into comments in the letter after a brief presentation that would summarize the report based on those comments. It'll take some time for an understanding. But that's, if we want to get a consensus product, it's going to take time in the June report. If we want to go ahead and summarize our overall review of this based on Chris's excellent work separately and issue a letter, not as a consensus, but as stakeholders, we can do that before the June meeting. I guess it's up to what the schedule would require us to do.
You know, Steve, my takeaway from this is really something that's been voiced in different ways by different HAB members at a number of meetings. And that's the concern that will we ever really get this funding, the amount of funding that we see in the estimates here. That's a tremendous amount of funding, whether or not you take into account escalation. And given all the problems that we have in the country today that are requiring a lot of dollars, particularly things like climate change, all the social aspects of trying to bring the country up more in terms of diversity and inclusivity, you just have to wonder, is this money going to be available? And if not, does DOE need to come up with a plan B or a plan D, or what if they don't get anywhere near this funding? What if in the 2040s Congress says, shut it off, no more? That's the concern and the takeaway I have. It's what if there's a really worst case scenario in that Congress simply doesn't want to put in any more money to this site, given the tremendous cost estimates that we're seeing.
I'm kind of absorbing what you said, because I think that is the issue for sure. I think a lot of us think we're going to have some breakthroughs, but we're not sure what those breakthroughs might be to form a plan B that's actually functional. The advantage of talking to the full board about it is so that the full board has an understanding of the magnitude of this issue without going into a lot of detail. So I think it would at least be worth pointing out the magnitude of even the lower cost case, and the range is tremendous.
My concern is thinking about the range of knowledge and understanding of the existing board, not the incoming members, but the existing board. 30 slides like this will set up a pretty big set of confusion. Particularly if you're after the so what and the 3 nuggets of advice or input that you want to give, whatever those are. So keeping it at an even higher level for a group of 37 seats, which is really 75 people, would be really important to help the group end up at a place where they would say, we want to make these 3 or 5 specific comments. And I'm just thinking through the group dynamics, not the quality of the data, but when advice goes to the full board, and this is part of the frustration that you feel as a committee, the board actually has to walk through a very similar mental process to understand what's going on as the committee did in 1 or more meetings. And so it accelerates at the board level to get everybody up to speed. And so the more data you have to get through at the board level, the harder it is to build consensus, not because there isn't agreement in the room, but because they have to understand it before they can agree to it. And so that's the group dynamics challenge.
I absolutely agree with you. It's very difficult.
So if you had some proposed nuggets around the magnitude of the cost or the magnitude of the uncertainty or a concern about, well, what the heck is plan B? And I'm being really simple. Then working back from that to help the group understand why are those things important to this committee and important to say at this time. Because the board won't follow these 30 pages
Oh, I agree with that.
I think if we're going to present it to the board, Chris, you can chime in on this idea, but if we're going to present it to the board for a general consensus to proceed with a letter, I'm not talking advice here.
Right.
We would have to have a summary. We would have to have the letter prepared and show the background, very brief background information from the report that would support each one of those points. In other words, don't go through the whole report because that, like you said, it would be an insurmountable task, I think. So we'd have to start with a letter that's prepared and ask for consensus and show the evidence from the report that would support that item, I think.
Which effectively is advice.
Well, but I don't think we would call it advice. I mean, what are we advising? We're making comments.
What I'm saying
What are
is,
we asking for
as
consensus
a
about?
process matter, it's actually the same process.
Well, I wouldn't see presenting the first day for information and taking comments and the second day getting approval. That's typical for advice. I wouldn't foresee that. I'd say, here's a presentation, here's the letter, here's the background for this letter. Does it sound okay to you?
I think
Otherwise, it gets too complicated.
yeah, the reality is there are issues that don't easily fit within our actual process, and you're trying to offer a way around that by submitting comments as individuals. And as I listen to the conversation and I think about all the issues that we're going to be dealing with the next couple of months, perhaps the most important thing is to get the information documented and to DOE. And if the most opportune way of doing that is for you guys to put together a letter as individuals, I wouldn't object to that. The issue I have is the HAB's process gets kind of tweaked in that venue. And maybe we have to just accept the fact that our process is going to have to be tweaked once in a while in order to keep things moving. But we have been criticized for that in the past.
Dan,
Well,
I've got Dan in queue.
Go ahead and respond if you would wish, Chris, and then I'll speak.
Was that Tom or Chris?
well, that was me. That was me starting. I was going to say, I'm sure between Chris and I and possibly some others from the BCC, we could put together a letter that summarizes the primary comments that we would have, and I think we could present that to the board. But it's most efficient, if you will, if it's going to violate the rules and regulations that we have to live with in the HAB, then maybe the simplest way is to present this letter as stakeholder comments like we talked about before. If that's the case, we could present it at the board meeting in June saying, this letter was issued, here was our comments for your information. It's not for consensus. We could do that, then still remain within our process, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, Shelley's not on the call. I usually kind of lean back on her to help keep us straight with process. Ruth, is there any issue that you or Gary would have with that approach?
Gary just stepped off, so I will go out on the limb. I mean, if it's information only, then it's just a letter that Tom wrote or a letter that Chris wrote, and here's what they said. That's easy. If it's a letter that you want consensus on, the process is just like advice, because you wouldn't send a letter unless the group had consensus on what was in the letter, because advice is essentially a letter.
Yeah. Well, it's a topic that's going to be around for a long time, so it's not a one-shot deal.
That's true.
Maybe we can, at a later date, get some educational material put together on both this life cycle report and also the system plan so that people have a little more in-depth understanding. So the next time it comes around, we can actually have some board conversation.
And with the big chunks of scope, cost, schedule work going on, you've got the AOA, the system plan, the holistic negotiations, the life cycle report. So you've got these multiple things going on, figuring out how to do this from different angles. I think particularly for new board members, that could be really confusing really fast.
Yeah, it would be overwhelming.
And that's my reaction is I worry about overwhelming the room, because then how do I help them like clear the fog and get their stuff done? That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. So I've got Dan Solitz and Chris. Dan.
Okay, yeah, back to the melter capacities, the doubts on meeting those capacity factors. I was surprised by that too, given what I can remember from Savannah River's melter experience. So I'm wondering if we couldn't get a subject matter expert on Savannah River melters to go for a joint meeting with budget and tanks and kind of get a better background on that.
Steve, help me with this. I think the Savannah River melters are kind of significantly different than ours.
Yeah, they're, as I understand it, they're a lot smaller, but I think that the issue when I heard it discussed in the past was not just related to the melter, but the whole system that supports the melter. So I would be out of context if I was to say what I think it really means without having more discussion with Delmar or whoever it was that told us that some time ago.
Yeah, I mean, because the other thing is that the composition of tank waste at Savannah River and Hanford is different enough that it affects the melter stuff you got to worry about.
Right.
And now you know everything I know about melters.
Well, a lot of this is due to the improvements at Savannah. I think were due to just climbing up the learning curve, and we're smart as Savannah, so it might be helpful or at least encouraging to hear from them about how they overcame their barriers for not getting good efficiency, and give us a better understanding of how those barriers are overcome. I know that the composition of the waste is radically different, but it's the same kind of people.
Chris, we have just blown through our break, just so you all know.
Yeah. Steve, I have a question for you and Tom here. Given your length of time on the HAB, I want to read one sentence out of milestone 36, which drives this report, and see if this has actually ever happened. It says, in making assumptions for the purposes of preparing the initial report, US DOE shall take into account the views of EPA and ecology, and shall also take into account the values expressed by the affected tribal governments and Hanford stakeholders regarding work scope, priorities, and schedule. Have we, to our knowledge, or in the past, have we contributed to this report? Have our values or whatever been taken into account in the development of this report or earlier reports?
I guess I'd say that I think to the extent that the whole baseline takes our input into account, then I would say yes, because they're trying to do what we all want to do in getting the site to the ultimate safest position that is Alara be achieved. But I couldn't make a direct connection between the assumptions and that in the report and the sentence you just read.
Yeah.
We've got about a half hour's worth of work to continue. Tom, how do you want to wrap this up?
I guess what I'd suggest is I believe the best approach here is for us to prepare a letter, issue it to stakeholders, and then have a 1 hour spot in the June meeting to very briefly summarize the report as it fed into the recommendations in the stakeholder letter, which had already been released at that point. In other words, try to inform the membership of what was done and why the recommendations were made as they were. Otherwise, we're going to get hung up on time in the June report and on understanding the report completely. And I don't see a lot of value in that, frankly.
I think that's a good proposal. I was just wondering if Gary is back. I wonder if he's would have anything to say about that.
Well, the comments will be accepted at any time, even though we've got kind of a cutoff on the public comment period. If the HAB wants to produce some sort of document, either individually or collectively, it would still be accepted. Because, like I said, this is a 3-year report, so there's no deadline, no looming deadline that would prevent that. So yes, your input would be accepted, whether it's in June, whether it's in September or next spring, so that you can go through that. But don't wait 2 years to do that. If you're going to do it on this report, sooner probably rather than later. And I think, frankly, given the processes, maybe even just comments as individuals is probably the path of least resistance.
I think that's kind of the conclusion we're coming to. So Tom, I think your proposal passes the test.
Okay. We'll proceed that way. I'll work with Chris, and if anybody else is interested to review this before we send it out, please let us know, and we'll go from there and try to get it out as soon as possible, but maybe at this point no deadline, well before June, as long as we have a June agenda item to talk about it in the HAB.
Yes.
I think that's good conclusion.
The one point I feel like I've been thinking about recently with this is just the timing of when this comes out, and I really appreciate that the extension was granted. Having it overlap with the budget, and I think it's good that it's now every 3 years and not an annual report. But when it does overlap with the budget, it just creates this competition of what to respond to, not just for individuals and organizations, but the HAB too. So if there's a way to influence the timing of when this comes out, or just have more, I feel like this is part of the crunch. We spend so much time in the priorities advice. There isn't time left to really work on the life cycle report. And then we're in this kind of rush situation. So I don't know if that's possible. It could be that maybe we have like some very basic advice. It's like, but on the timing of the report. But I don't know logistically for DOE if it's possible to release it, 2 months before the budget process starts, then it, feels like you'd get more comments on time.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, Ruth. We can probably talk more with Gary on that when we go forward. Okay, Ruth, to save us some time here, I think we can finish up. We only have 20 minutes anyway to finish. And for the last part of the agenda on the review of the action items, what I suggest on that, which is going to be the longest portion of this half-hour schedule anyway, why don't we defer that, and I'll try to update the actions and send them to Gary as well as you, and they can be ultimately incorporated into the minutes of this meeting. But everyone will have a chance to review the minutes of the meeting once they come out anyway. So if we can defer the action list, and between you and I and Gary, we can take a look at them.
Okay.
So if we can go forward with there were 2 or 3 other items, I can't recall from the agenda what they were directly.
Yep.
Oh, the restructuring. Yeah, the only other items other than the action item review, there were 2 others, the committee restructuring topic, and just a brief mention of that, and the impacts of membership packet approval. I think I can address with you pretty much verbally. I wanted to put these on the agenda for really for your information. We've identified them initially in one or both of the recent meetings the BCC had in February and March as an item that is on the table, that is being discussed. And I wanted to just update you as best I can because they are both significant issues for all HAB membership, including BCC. For the HAB the committee restructuring, the terminology is somewhat different now, but well, for this it's the same. I'm sorry. This is the topic where it has been suggested in discussions between HAB leadership and DOE that with the mission being changed ultimately at Hanford to switch from where it has been on cleanup to actually operations of some of our facility with DF Law and Tisker as the first efforts into that. The question came up as to whether or not our layout of HAB committees is still appropriate. Do we need to modify it to some extent to meet the revising mission at Hanford in operations, or for other reasons? Do we see a need to take a step back and look at our committees to see if we're really putting the effort into where it should be to support DOE? I'd like to show you very briefly, Ruth, if you could pull up one of your attachments on the Venn diagram. As a very rough initial cut that tried to relate committees, our current committees, with how they interact with each other and separately. Bob Siyama primarily, and I think with some help from maybe Tom Cecilia, and I'm not sure about that latter, but there were a couple people involved. But Bob put this together, called a Venn diagram, and it shows the overlapping interaction areas between committees. It's very difficult to read this, and it's in your packet that you got for the meeting announcement, so I won't try to read it. But it does show the interaction between tank waste, RAP, and HSEP particularly, and they do have some overlapping areas with the budget and contracts and the PIC committees kind of influencing all of that function. I don't know. It helps to visualize that. This is nothing that we're going to be voting on or considering in detail directly, but it just shows you a method that we can use to determine, in fact, how our committees are interacting. Are we focused on the right things for DOE and for the HAB values, and whether or not we have to, or we would recommend making any changes. So this subject, not just this chart, but the subject overall is going to be a subject for discussion within the HAB for some months to come. And I wanted you to be aware of it because there could be changes in some of our roles in the committees and some of our committees for that matter as we go forward. That's about all I wanted to say on that, unless there are other comments or questions. I think I've told you about everything I know on that subject, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of what was going on. Let's see, is Chris and Liz in the queue, or is that a different topic?
Oh, that's an old queue.
Oh, okay. Okay. The other topic I just wanted to mention briefly to you is the membership packet approval delay. We all, including DOE and the HAB, all went through last year some difficult times because of delays in getting headquarters approval of the membership package last year. And what that did to affect some of the meetings that we had at HAB. We didn't have the right number of people for a quorum. We couldn't conduct business in October. A number of things that occurred and that was disruptive to our normal functioning, and it caused a lot of consternation in a lot of people, I think. This year, I actually think it's going to be similar. DOE's packet is or is going in very soon. I'm not sure which, Gary, but it will be submitted to headquarters for this year's membership packet. The deadline for approval is September, the end of September. And so because our membership, the ones that are meeting or exceeding the 6-year term limit, which is now being more strictly enforced under headquarters guidance, those people are affected directly and likely will not be in the submitted membership package that our local DOE sends to headquarters. And as a result of that, there'll be an interim period between the end of June, when the current members' terms expire, to at least the end of September, when we expect to get approval of the new membership package. We're going to be missing some people, some in leadership positions on the committees, and in fact on our HAB overall, but also some key members that are going to be exiting the board and will not be effectively involved at HAB in the HAB functions after the end of June. So there's going to be a whole, whatever that is, July, August, September, 3 or 4 months of a period between the end of June and the end of September where we're not going to be able to conduct much, if any, formal business. So be expecting that, and just be aware of that's an issue. And I think Gary and our local DOE staff are doing everything they can to try to expedite approvals and to make that transition a little smoother in the future. But that's kind of where we are this year.
Right.
Gary, is that about right? Any comment on that?
Yeah, pretty close. In fact, working on finalizing the packet, and we've got a meeting next week. DOE has a meeting with Ecology and EPA next week to hopefully finalize the packet so we can submit it. We're asking for a September appointment time frame, but headquarters is going to do what headquarters is going to do. The good thing is that by shifting the appointment date locally, this should hopefully be the last time that we're going to go through this appointment lapse. And part of what our plan is that I'm going to be discussing with Ecology and EPA next week is starting our recruitment process for the next year, which would be 2025, I think. Starting it as early, or 2024 rather, is starting that as early as this fall to give ourselves plenty of time to work on it, instead of having to bump up against a crazy deadline like what we did this year. But that's the update that I have. I see that Ryan is in the queue. So do you have anything to add to that from Ecology's standpoint, Ryan?
I actually, excuse me, sorry. I think I first had just a general question. And Gary, I apologize if I missed this in all the HAB meetings this week. Was there any movement on, I think we requested, or somebody else requested, to see if there's any possibility of the HAB members that are going to have their membership lapse due to the summer month period, about there being some kind of temporary authorization or something like that for them to fill in there. I forgot what the exact term was, but to have them fill in their seats for the summertime, some temporary thing. Was there any action on that?
Good question, Ryan, and this is a complex wide problem, and all of the boards have sent a letter up to the Secretary of Energy, recognizing this as a problem. My understanding is we're getting close to having a policy and instructions, and we've got the EMSSAB meeting coming up, excuse me, coming up in about 2 weeks. The first part of May. And I expect that there will be something out from there, and then we'll figure out how it applies to Hanford.
Perfect, thanks. And to the other topic, I don't think I have much to add at this point, other than I think we look forward to the conversation next week. So thanks for sharing the update.
Okay, thank you both. The only other item, Ruth, that we really need to cover now is any topics for the future meetings, and I'm not sure the next meeting for the BCC may very well be in August, which I think is what the schedule says. So
the schedule has committee meetings, a committee week in August.
Yeah, there's none between now and then other than the full HAB meeting, right? Okay. Right. Yeah, I don't know if we'll be meeting then, but at least that's the next meeting of the BCC. Is there any topics of interest to the membership that we want to carry forward and plan for that August timeframe, basically? Any suggestions? None?
Chris?
Yeah, Tom.
Yes.
This has come up a number of times, but maybe we could have a discussion with DOE on how contingency and management reserves are handled for unexpected events.
Okay. 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 Ruth, anything else from your end?
No, I'll send you the markup.
And I'll send you and Gary what I would suggest as markups for the action list, and we'll wrap that up too for the minutes. Great. Well, I really appreciate all of your time and your efforts today, particularly for Chris, in doing so much work in summarizing that massive report. It is an important one. And I'll get with Chris. I know, Chris, you're out of town for a week after today. But I'll try to touch base with you before you go, if that's possible, and we'll put our plans together for the stakeholder comments.
Okay, no, good enough.
Thank you all. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.